Okay, welcome everybody to the second session for the SSA Ladder Pilots Flight Instructor course. I'm Ron Ridenauer. I'm going to talk about aviation instructor responsibility and professionalism, which are found in the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, Chapter 8. With me today, this evening, the same panel we had 2 weeks ago, Rich Carlson, SSF chairman, Brooke Compton, he's a trustee and an FAA DPE. Ken Sorensen, he's a Region 10 director. Bob Wander, Airline Safety Foundation advisor, myself. And you'll be able to put your questions in at the bottom of the screen. I cannot see your questions, but my panel can, and they will try to answer your questions either with a text message back to you, or if it's something that we should discuss during the meeting, they'll break in. I usually pause about every 10 minutes for questions, and I plan to do that again. That seemed to work out pretty good a couple of weeks ago, so then the panel can ask questions, and we can discuss them and try to come up with reasonable answers to them. So that's the format that we're following. We'll talk about aviation instructor responsibilities. So the FAA is kind of divided this up into aviation instructors and flight instructors. We'll talk about flight instructors here momentarily. The reason for that is this Aviation Instructor's Handbook covers all aviation instructors, whether it's for mechanics or for other venues in aviation. Aviation instructors, gliders, CFIs are only a part of that. So we'll talk about aviation instructor responsibilities first. Number one, primary, and this comes out of page 8-1 of the Aviation Instructor Handbook. Helping the learners to learn. Now they've changed the phraseology in this newest edition, and they call students learners. And so you'll see the word learners throughout the book as you're reading through it, and we'll do that as well here. But helping learners to learn. I may stumble on students once in a while, but that's one of your primary responsibilities, and it's like any instructor. That's a responsibility, and it involves a lot of different steps, and we'll go through a few of those this evening. And as we go along in these courses, we'll go through more and more of them as well. Providing adequate instruction. Now you might say, well, what does it mean exactly? Well, it means that you're well prepared when you give a lesson, whether it's a ground lesson on weight and balance, or whether it's a flight lesson on steep turns or some other maneuver that you have to teach. You want to make sure that you're studied up on the subject matter as well, remembering that you're a subject matter expert. SME, as we refer to that. And so you want to make sure that you've done an adequate amount of studying on your own prior to doing that. You may have to review a few things that maybe you've forgotten, especially if you're not instructing on a regular basis. So demanding appropriate standards of performance. So it depends upon what phase you are in as to what is the appropriate standard of performance. I often look at the student pilot standard of performance to mean that since there is no quote unquote standards, in particular like there is in the ACS or the PTS in the glider world, the appropriate standards for like a student pilot would be that they're not committing some of the common errors that you find in the glider flying handbook. So if you go through there and you say you're looking at the maneuver steep turns. Well, you want to make sure that they're not committing errors that are found in that teaching on a regular basis. For student pilot, actually, I don't think steep turns is in there, so it's probably more like approaches and landings and takeoffs and tows and things like that. So look in the glider flying handbook for those common errors. Otherwise, if you're recommending a person for the private pilot certificate or the commercial pilot certificate, you can find the standards of performance and the appropriate PTS. Emphasizing the positive. We'll talk more about that in the future, but basically you want to try to keep as positive as you can when you give instruction. Critique is an important piece of the puzzle, but you don't want to dwell on the critique too much, and always try to provide some kind of positive motivation when you're giving a critique. Perhaps the most important responsibility of all aviation instructors is to ensure aviation safety, and there's various ways that we go about doing that. And again, we'll go through that as we go forward in these seminars. But some of those ways are trying to promote a safety culture within your club or organization. Trying to remain current on all the different changes that come about, because there are a number of changes that come about through the years, whether it's an FAR change or a change in policy or change in the standards even. When we do get the ACS, which eventually will come to the glider world, those changes will be readily apparent, and you'll need to study those and make sure that you prepare your students in accordance with the ACS as we go forward. That's not in the cards anytime soon. I don't think. I guess there's a slight possibility we might have ACS in the glider world in about a year, but that's maybe hopeful on my part. Minimizing learner frustration is another important factor in teaching. You're going to motivate the learners. One way to motivate the learners is to keep them informed with where their progress is. That's a good reason to have a progress card or page or whatever you're going to do to use to keep track of how your learners are progressing. It's really an important piece of the puzzle to provide adequate instruction. That way you know where they're at. You can remember, if you're their regular instructor and they haven't been out for a few weeks, you might tend to forget exactly where you're at in the curriculum. And so it provides a organized way for you, the instructor, to see where your learners are at in the curriculum. Approach learners as individuals. We have young people, hopefully a lot of young people learning to fly gliders as young as 13 and 14 years old. And they require a little bit different tactic than a mature adult who, maybe is got some pressures going on with their job or their life, and you have to identify those things that are in their lives and make sure that you approach them as individuals, because that's what they are. Give credit when credit's due. I talked about that basically, goes along with criticize constructively. You still want to try to motivate the people, your learners, as best you can, but make sure you give credit when it's due. If they do something well during a lesson, we'll make sure they know that. But don't be afraid to criticize as long as it's constructive criticism. In other words, you offer them some ideas about how to improve. To just I used to use a facilitated debriefing when I was instructing on a regular basis, which means that the learner is directly involved with the debriefing, and you kind of get some feedback from them as to how they think they're doing. How do you think you did that those stall recoveries where you're recognizing the stall at the proper time and recovering using the proper inputs to recover from the stall. So make sure that you uh, criticize constructively and include your learner in the debrief critique as well. Be consistent. Try not to judge them on uh, one set of rules or one set of criteria at one time, and then the next time say, well, you didn't do it this way, or you didn't hold it within 50 feet. They might think, well, you told me all I had to do was hold it within 100 feet, and so be consistent with your criticism. And of course, admit errors. That's where you, the instructor, really build some credibility, is admitting when you're wrong, or at least admitting when you don't know the answers, rather than making the answer up. If you try to make the answer up too much, you're going to get caught doing that. And I know from way back when I first started being a flight instructor, I was young. I was 20 years old, I think, and it just, it was tough to admit the errors when I really didn't know the answers. So don't be afraid to admit error, or admit that you don't know the answer and that you'll find the answer out for it. Do we have any comments from the crowd that maybe want to discuss?
Nothing showed up yet.
Okay. So now we're going to delve into flight instructor responsibilities, which is different than it's more focused on flight instruction versus just general aviation instructors. So you're responsible to evaluate the learner's piloting ability, directly, whether it's, besides the fact that you're going to have to evaluate their ability to the knowledge that they need to have. You also have to evaluate their piloting ability. And the standards that we use at that criteria after they're soloed, the standards that we're striving for, of course, are found in the PTS, whether it's private or commercial or flight instructor. So that will be how you go about evaluating your learner as they move along. And then pilot supervision, that's obviously another uh, big responsibility that you have. In airplane flying, you have more responsibility for pilot supervision, and that you um, send people on solo cross countries and things like that. But in the gliders, we don't generally have student pilots flying cross country. It's not that it can't be done, and certainly if you think that that's something that will motivate your learner to send them on a short cross country or try to get their silver distance flying or something like that, certainly, I would encourage that, because some people are at that level that they are going to lose focus if they don't have some other goals. So, but pilot supervision is very important, and that includes just simple things like making sure that they're signed off every 90 days for soloing, or if they want to solo a different glider, they have to have some kind of other dual flight instruction, whether it's just a ground instruction if it's a single place sailplane, or and then another sign off. We'll talk more about endorsements here in a minute. Obviously, practical test recommendations. That's a big one, and understanding when the practical test recommendations, what practical test recommendations look like, how you have to go about making those decisions as to whether they're ready for a practical test. Flight instructor endorsements, including additional training and endorsements. So flight instructor endorsements are a big responsibility, and I find that when I give flight instructor check rides, that this is an area that, and I suspect Bert and Tony Condon and some of the others that give instructor check rides find that is a weak area, to be quite honest, with flight instructors. Um, Obviously, we have the advisor circular, which helps you to uh, with the verbiage of what the endorsement should look like. But realistically, you got to remember that the endorsements are required by the regulations. They're not required by that advisor circular. They're required by the regulations, and so you must make sure that you reference the regulations and that you're using the regulations to make those endorsements. Additional training in the glider would be, or additional training that leads to an endorsement is the aero tow or the ground launch tow or the self launch endorsements. Those are all endorsements which require additional training. And you need to know where to find that training. You know, if it's a student pilot, the training comes from 6187, that area that talks about training before solo. But if it's a private pilot, well, then it comes in 61. Well, let's see, the 105 would be the aeronautical knowledge that you need for a private pilot. 61107 would be the aeronautical proficiency or the flight training that you have to be proficient in. 61109 is where you find the training that's required. You know, the amount of dual training you have to give, the amount of solo training that your student has to have as well before you can make those endorsements. Pilot proficiency is another area of responsibility the flight instructors have, and that involves primarily besides your student pilots, you're looking at certificated pilots and doing either flight reviews or what we recommend at the Soaring Safety Foundation to do the wings program that's outlined in the 6156 as one of the alternative methods of compliance with the flight review requirement. So flight proficiency is very important, and I think that personally, I think that the FAA proficiency program that they have, the wings program as we refer to it quite commonly as, is an ongoing proficiency program which dictates that your learner has participation in it, and that they have to do 3 ground training elements, and then they have to do 3 flight training elements as well. And realistically, you, the instructor, are usually not all that involved with the ground training elements. There's seminars, like this is a seminar that you can get wings credits for. And we've got it signed up so that you can get a wings credits this time. We didn't have it in place last time, but we do have it in place and ready to go this time. But pilot proficiency is the airlines, the military, the corporate world all found out that proficiency is really important for safety. And to do a flight review, quote unquote flight review every 2 years is not really the same as doing an ongoing proficiency program where you do something every 3 or 4 months. And so instead of waiting for the 2-year mark and then trying to cram it in all in one day or something like that, it's found to be much more effective to do it over a period of time. So, and we as instructors have a strong responsibility for see and avoid, and teaching people how to see and avoid. Again, your student, your learner is probably concentrating on the maneuver and not really concentrating as much as they should outside. Although, in any maneuver that we do during a check ride, and we want to emphasize the fact that we need to look before we and clear the area before we do the maneuvers. That's right in the PTS. It's in the preamble of the PTS system. It's actually listed in every task in the ACS system. So When we get that, you'll see that show up in every task. But it's very important to teach how to see and avoid and look around and actually move your head, not just move your eyeballs, especially in soaring, where we could be in gaggles of thermals and things like that. It's very important to try to make sure that we look outside a lot. Learner's pre-solo flight thought process, so it's, when a person gets to the point where they're getting ready for solo, you want to try to prepare them for that, and they've got to take a knowledge test, a short knowledge test about the glider that they're flying and the area that they're flying in, and the flight pattern that they have to fly and things like that. So you want to get them kind of involved, or you do want to get them involved very uh, deeply in that process so that they feel as prepared as you feel that they are when you finally do solo them. Also found in the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, I'm trying to remember what page it's on. I should have put it on here. Let me look at it real quick. I think it's on 8-5, but let me just look real quickly here in the book. I'm an old school guy that likes to use the book. I know I've got it on the website too. I've got volumes of it, but that's page 8-6 talks about the aviation's model code of conduct. So, and you can get that at that website there, www.secureav.com. When you go to that, you'll see there's a flight instructor's model code of conduct, and there's also a glider aviator's mode of conduct as well, model code of conduct. Generally, they're divided into those 7 areas that you see: general responsibilities of aviators and instructors, learners, passengers, people on the surface, training and proficiency. There's that word proficiency showing up again. Security, we don't talk about security too much, but it is something that we're all responsible for in aviation, and make sure that the field we're flying off is secure. Environmental issues, we're pretty friendly to the environment with the sailplanes. Obviously, we use tow planes, which have fuel and things like that, which are not as friendly with the environment, but we're pretty friendly once we get off tow. The use of technology, this is really a big one that's coming more and more into the realm of consideration as we move forward, because airplanes and even gliders these days are getting, if you're going to fly a glider competitively or cross country, you're going to have a moving map probably in the glider. You're going to have other things in the glider that are helping you to find the lift and stay in the lift. And so it's really important that you understand how to use the technology, and that you're not trying to program the moving map on tow. You want to make sure that you know the proper use of the technology, and not allow the learner to misuse. It should all be programmed up by the time you get in the air. So, advancement and promotion of general aviation and aviation instruction. So, and that's what we're trying to do in the Soaring Society of America right now, is trying to make advancements and promotions in the membership, and even general aviation is suffering to some extent from membership. So I know some of the alphabet companies, AOPA and EAA, some of their numbers are down, just not as drastically as ours are, but they are down a little bit. So at any rate, this you can find that website also in the Aviation Instructor's Handbook on page 5-8, 8-6. So do we have any questions so far, or are we
They've been coming in, but I've been answering them. Nothing
Okay.
seemed to be jumping out that would get into this needing a verbal answer on.
Okay. All right. So Aviation Instructor Handbook, moving on, page 8-7, teaching tips from veteran instructors. And there's a whole list of them on page 8-7. I put a couple here that I thought were maybe should be talked about or highlighted a little bit more. One of them is use a mentor to provide a second opinion. You know, if you're struggling with a learner who's maybe not progressing the way that you think they should, or they're distracted by something or something like that, that they just, you know, maybe a second opinion isn't a bad idea. And so I know that a lot of schools use that second opinion before they send the person solo, and then again when they before they send the person for a like a private pilot check ride or something. So it's not a bad idea to have another instructor to look over your shoulder once in a while and make sure that uh, you know if they see something that your learners are doing consistently, maybe they can help you change your pattern. You have to continue to encourage high standards of performance. You know, no matter what stage a student is or learner's in, make sure that you're encouraging high standards of performance. You know, as we've often noted, and we'll note even more, the law of primacy dictates that the way you learn something the first time is the way that you tend to remember it, and you'll revert back to that methodology, even if you learn later that that methodology was maybe incorrect or needs to be modified a little bit. It's much more difficult to modify it in the future than it is to do it right the first time, and that's predicated on the law of primacy. Maintaining a high level of supervision of pilot training. We already talked about that a little bit, but it's important that you know, when your students are flying solo, that you still add, look over their shoulder once in a while and make sure that they're not making a low approach, or if you see something that you don't like, well, you know, be sure that you go and talk to them, because that's your responsibility as a flight instructor, is to maintain a supervision over your students as they continue to develop their own skills and knowledge. You know, the SSF has talked a lot about this next one, developing a safety culture environment. You know, I think that to some extent, we've been fairly successful at it. I know that, you know, nothing is certain, but Rich is tracking uh, the number of accidents over the years based on the FAA databases and things like that, and we're seeing some decline. I hate to say that I mean, it's not drastic, but it does seem to be a little bit of a decline. And I credit it to the fact that people are using, developing a safety culture that includes all the people in the club. You know, whether you're you know, 14-year-old kid and you're running wings, or you're a crusty old pilot like myself that you know, is towing the gliders or flying in as a flight instructor. I mean, we all owe it to each other to watch each other and critique each other and make sure that we're doing things safely. I mean, if you see something that you think is uh, is questionable on safety, you need to say something. I mean, it's incumbent upon each and every one of us in our club or our commercial operation, even, or whatever. We don't want to cut corners. You know, that's usually what happens when you cut corners, is that you're encroaching on the safety culture that you want. And so I've participated. I know Bert primarily does most of the site surveys, and but I participated in a few site surveys, and I I get some feedback once in a while that, you know, they're appreciative of our comments and our reinforcement of trying to develop a safe culture. You know, I know that for a fact that a couple of the clubs that I've worked with have really turned things around, and I have to hand it to them. But it's been hard work. You know, a safety culture doesn't come about because you want it to. It takes hard work to continue to develop. And the old excuse of, well, we've always done it that way may not be the safe thing to do. And so try to try to examine everything. And that's another thing that we do at the flight instructor refresher courses is we talk about that and offer some different ways to look at things rather than be reactive after an accident or an incident has happened, to be proactive and try to look at things and try to envision what could happen and then decide whether that's something that needs to be addressed before it ever happens. So, assign specific homework after each flight lesson. Really a critical and important stage of being a flight instructor. I think it keeps the learner motivated. They have something to look forward to. They have something that they know that they need to look at before their next flight lesson. It keeps them involved with how they're progressing and, and what they have to do to continue that progression that they've had. So that go hand in hand with carefully documenting all training events. You know, again, I can't, you know, when I ran a commercial glider school here in the Chicago area, um, we did not have a documentation paperwork to keep track of where the learners were at as far as the curriculum was concerned. And I developed one on my own and it had to get all the flight instructors to buy into it. But in the long run, it actually benefited everybody. And once the flight instructors started using it, they found that the documentation was not only valuable to themselves, but it was valuable to their learners as well, their students, because they could, you know, look at that and see where they were at and what was coming up next and decide, you know, what they needed to concentrate on as they move forward. So a post-flight debriefing after an FAA check ride, I think, is really enlightening to an instructor, and I think that it helps you, the instructor, to develop maybe a little bit better or different training techniques, or you know, if the FAA examiner has, you know, it's another set of eyes, and they're looking at it from a little different perspective than you, the instructor, are looking at it from. And you know, we're primarily an evaluation role, and I know that instructors have an evaluation role piece to be an instructor, but that's totally what we do as a examiner. Is we basically just evaluate, and so we have standards that we have to evaluate by the PTS in the case of gliders, ACS in the case of airplanes, but that's the standards by which we have to evaluate, and the standards by which we're looking at training is through the publications like the Glider Flying Handbook. So remember that as you teach, try to conform with some of the things that are found, or the things that are found in the Glider Flying Handbook as well. Encourage your learners to establish personal limits. Again, another topic that, you know, as you move forward, your personal limits do and can and do change. But initially, you want to be pretty conservative about it. You know, I mean, if all you've ever done with an instructor is a five knot direct crosswind, well, you know, it's not time to go out and do a 10 or 15 knot direct crosswind on your own. You know, it's okay to do it with an instructor where you can actually learn carefully and with some guidance from your instructor. But try to keep personal limits in mind. You know, whether it's you know, primarily with the glider flying, it's crosswind limits. I mean, if you're flying a touring motor glider or something like that, well, then you are going to have to worry more about cross-country limits and things like that. But for the most part, in a pure gliders, in the initial training, before we start to go for badges, whether it's ABC badge or the bronze badge, or ultimately the silver and gold badge with diamonds. I mean, as you move through that those avenues of training, you want to set your personal limits and make sure that you try to stick with them. Again, that's another way that the safety culture environment helps to maintain that safety. And I find it very important, or very enlightening actually, to review the NTSB accident reports in developing scenarios. They're obviously those were accidents where the scenario led to an accident, and so to utilize those scenarios in your training, I think is again enlightening to your students. If you say, well, if you do a skidding turn to final, you might, and you accidentally stall the glider, well, you're only a couple hundred feet off the ground and you might spin into the ground. And while that's very true, if you don't have any kind of scenario to look at that with, well, then it doesn't have as much value, in my opinion, as it does if you actually can point to an accident report, or you can point to, in fact, later on in this presentation, at the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you a condor video of exactly that scenario, a skidding turn to final. So we'll have a chance to discuss that a little bit more. So let's talk a little bit about scenarios here. I'm going to talk about this first scenario. Your instructor arrives at the field a little late. He's dressed in a wrinkled t-shirt and cut-off jeans. He then introduces himself to you and asks, well, what are we going to do today? You reply that you don't know, but you want to fly. He says, well, then let's go fly. So let's just kind of think about this a little bit. I mean, is that really an instructor attitude and professionalism that you want to portray in your instruction? Well, it might be a little bit obvious. Hopefully it is a little bit obvious that no, that's not the type of instructional professionalism that you want to portray. You want to in fact portray some of the things that are directly opposite. In this case, they're not. It's pretty tough if you show up in a wrinkled t-shirt and cut-off jeans. I mean, you got to act like a professional, and so therefore, if you want to be treated as a professional, and asking your student, well, what are we going to do today, really isn't a good way to do it either, because you should know what you're going to do today. You should have it planned out. You should have a ground session already prepared, at least in your head, so that you can use the appropriate references, the glider flying handbook, or whatever you're going to talk about, and you know what you want to prepare for, whether it's boxing the wake on tow, or introducing slow flight, or whatever it is. You should have some kind of looking at the following some kind of curriculum that'll make the progression for your learner in a systematic and building block type of methodology. And here's another scenario where your instructor arrives at the field a little bit early. She's dressed in a collared shirt and slacks. She looks at the schedule and notes that who she's going to fly with for the day. She finds the student progress record and decides that the lesson will be introducing stalls and stall recoveries. He meets with you and asks if you had time to read the material on aerodynamic stalls from the glider flying handbook that was assigned after the last lesson. She conducts a review discussion about the material and then prepares to go fly. I think you'll all have to agree that this is a much better approach as a professional flight instructor to, I mean, you don't have to show up in a shirt and tie, but certainly you should be neat and clean and act like you want to be there, and um, be there a little bit early so that you can prepare yourself about planning where your students are at, whether it's your student that you've been flying with right along, or whether it's uh, my student that I wasn't able to be there that weekend, so you took over for me, and you want to make sure that you know where they're at in the curriculum, uh, and know what you need to talk about as you prepare for the lesson. So again, it just emphasizes the need for some kind of progress record so that you can adequately prepare before the student even gets there, so that you can, make the lesson worthwhile for you and the student both. I had a couple of questions here to consider. Which instructor would you rather be receiving flight instruction from, and why? What are some of the attributes you want to aspire to or avoid? You can send in your comments to Rich and the panel there if you want to talk about that some more.
Ron, I'd like to jump in just briefly on the
Sure.
live primacy. One of the
Yes.
great examples is clearing your turns. If you don't get the student or learner to clear their turns the very first time they do it, they will stop doing it and you'll never get them to do it again.
Yeah. Well, it certainly becomes more complicated to get them to do it again. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not that they'll never do it again, but it just depends on how big a stick you're carrying, right, Rich?
Yep. And the other thing I want to mention is the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. It's another book that the FAA publishes we should be putting in our library.
Yeah, I agree. And, that's in my list. You'll see at the end of this, every lesson plan, I list out the references that I used. And Rich points out very good that the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, along with the Glider Flying Handbook, is essential that you review that, because it has many things in it that the Glider Flying Handbook does not. The Glider Flying Handbook is a little bit slim on some of the topic areas that you need to know about on the ground, and the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge can fill in on some of those. And in fact, Holtz decided that that was so important that he created his own glider pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge. So I think that is is a is a good reference as well. The FAA one is excellent. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the FAA pilot's handbook, or the PHAC as we call it in the business. So let's talk a little bit about professionalism. And again, this is found in Chapter 8. I failed to get the, yeah, it starts on page 8-7. So let's talk about it. To be a professional is you have to be sincere. I mean, you have to be dedicated to the job of instructing. You can't just be out there haphazardly uh, and not knowledgeable about the information that you're trying to convey. And so, because your learner will pick up on that insincerity. I mean, they know if you're wanting to be there or not. And if you don't want to be there, well, then, maybe it's better if you're not, and you let some other instructor do your instruction for the day. So sincerity is really, really important. Acceptance of the learner. Again, we've talked about this, but I'm just going to emphasize it again as idea of being a professional is that you have to be able to accept the learner. You're going to have some people who come from different walks of life. I remember one time I had a guy who was a um, bulldozer driver, and And I remember he was having trouble with the toe, and I was uh, trying to assist him. And one time, and I got on the stick with him, and I told him I'm getting on the stick here with you to help you a little bit with what you're doing. And I mean, it felt like the stick was set in cement. This guy was muscular, and he was had a grip on that stick like you wouldn't believe. But he's uh, coming from a different walk of life, and the controls in that bulldozer are different than the controls in a glider, and so you have to make sure that they understand that and can make those changes in their habits. And the biggest way to do that is that you have to accept that learner in the first place. You have to say, rather than yelling at them and telling them don't do that or do this or whatever, you have to accept them as a learner and make sure that you um, instruct them adequately. Personal appearance and habits. It's again, personal appearance is very important as well. I mean, a lot of these things that we talked about are really important, and I don't think any one is any less important than another. But I know that some newer instructors sometimes show up maybe not as neat and professional as they should. They have habits that maybe are not as, as well. We don't, well, I hate to mention any habits. I mean, yeah, just we all have our own habits, good and bad. I mean, I have my own too, and I'm sure that some people would say that some of my habits are not all that appealing as well. So try to think about how you would come across to another person and the habits that you have. So demeanor, it's really important that you present a calm demeanor. If you're always yelling and screaming, I remember one instructor, uh, I could hear him on downwind leg. I was on standing on the ground. I could hear him on downwind leg yelling at the student uh, in the backseat of a 233, and it was that was kind of well. I don't think it's very personally very effective. Maybe to some people it is, but your demeanor I think is really important that you try to present a calm and professional demeanor so that you have the students, the learners, uh, indicate that you have the learners' uh, goals in mind. So when you're teaching, and use proper language. That doesn't mean just swears. Don't use swear words. Uh, you know, I know that that's a language that a lot of people don't even realize they're using when it comes. They use the barroom type language, they call it. But it's not really proper if you're a professional to be using that kind of language. And so, um, but more importantly, it's when you talk about proper language, it's important that you use aeronautical terms correctly. If you refer to in a stall that the nose drops, that's not really what it's doing. It's pitch, right? So the nose is pitching down in the stall. If you say that during the stall that the wing might drop off, well, is that really what the learner wants to hear? That the wing might drop off? It might bank steeper, right? But so try to use proper language when you're talking to your learners, because aviation terms that they will be reading in the books and manuals that you've assigned them, and that other instructors will be utilizing as well. So try to really uh, think about that and talk specifically using the terms that we all use as a common language. Evaluation of a learner's ability. There's demonstrated ability, actually stick and rudder skills. And it's arguably, a lot of instructors, especially the older instructors like myself, we grew up on the stick and rudder skills was the most important. But as we move forward, we've discovered that while the stick and rudder skills are very important, and I'm not trying to say they're not, because they are. Stick and rudder skills are very important, but equally important is judgment and decision-making skills. And so we not only have to get um, the stick and rudder skills, the demonstrated ability skills up to speed, but we also have to get how people make decisions, how people make judgments, and how you go about trying to evaluate the risks that are inherent in all of aviation, no matter what you do. And, like one of the risk management tools that we like to use is the PAVE checklist. And you can use the PAVE checklist on local flights or cross-country flights or any time. I mean, if you get a person in the habit of, thinking about the pilot, have I got a proper amount of rest last night? Have I not got a bad cold and it's going to block my sinuses? Am I remaining proficient before I take this person for a ride? I have the proper certificates. I meet the proper requirements for the currency as far as the FAA, but am I proficient at what I'm trying to do? So it's really important that you uh, make sure that you evaluate their abilities from that standpoint. And then again, we've already talked about this, keeping the learner informed. A lot of times learners will get to plateaus and they kind of don't know, they're kind of floundering. They really don't know what to do. And so, but keeping them informed about their progress is a big way to help continue to motivate them through those plateaus. Because plateaus in learning are quite common. They're not something that happens only to a few students, but they're actually quite common. And so keeping the learner informed as to their progress, again, that's another reason to use the progress card or the progress checklist so that both you and the learner can be informed about where their progress is at and where they're going from here. So the professional development that we all want to do as we move forward to continuing education, the Pilot Proficiency Awareness Program seminars, the FERCs. The FERC attendance seems to be down a little bit. I noticed at our local Chicago FERC this year, there was fewer people there, which kind of disappointed me, but I'm going to try to redouble my efforts in the Chicago area to try to get flight instructors to come to the flight instructor refresher courses. I mean, even if you're not renewing, I think that they offer some valuable insights to your and remind you of things that you need to be reminded of. As you well know, the one of the things that's changed is the flight instructor. Well, I assume that you know. I guess I'll tell you if you don't. The flight instructor certificate has in the past had an expiration date on it, and it's going forward. It will not have an expiration date on it. However, it'll be your responsibility to maintain a currency in the same methodology, whether it's going to a FERC or whether it's doing a certain number of activities. Um, you will still have to maintain that, and that's just still every 2 years. It's just that your flight instructor certificate itself won't have an expiration date. One way for you to maintain that is by going through a FERC, obviously, whether it's glider FERCs that it's not, they're no longer glider FERCs, but the FERCs that are offered by the Soaring Safety Foundation. We try to tailor them a little bit toward the gliders, but we're required by by the FAA to include all instructors in them, because any instructor can attend a flight instructor refresher course. So we're required by the curriculum to make sure that we include some of those other instructor activities that they can utilize to maintain their currency. So much like a flight review, you're going to have to keep track of it yourself and continue to maintain your currency every 2 years. And when you complete something, it'll be recorded via IACRA, and so that'll be kind of your renewal date when you actually complete a FERC or whatever, and you file it with the FAA on IACRA. That'll be your new 24 calendar month renewal date. Educational training institution like community colleges and technical schools are another good avenue to refresh your skills. Commercial organizations like flight schools and industry organizations like AOPA, EAA, and of course the FAA. We all have items on our websites to take courses to refresh your skills and your knowledge on an ongoing basis. Some sources of materials, printed materials. Commercial people like ASA have printed materials, whether it's BHAC or Butterflying Handbook. Climb has some too. There's the FAR-AIM book as well. And there's electronic materials. The FAA.gov site has pretty much all the handbooks are on there in electronic form, where you can download them to your computer and refer to them in that way. And the glider pilots ground schools, I've talked about them. I'll just mention them again. I've got on one of the last slides, I've got some references to that. But in a couple of weeks, they're going to be running a glider pilots ground school, which will be a 3-night Zoom course, and it specifically will prepare you for a knowledge test, whether it's a flight instructor or a pilot knowledge test. And so I will not be presenting that evening. We go next evening, next Wednesday, we'll be making a presentation. Then we'll skip a week while that glider pilots ground schools is active, and hopefully you can, if you're trying to get prepped up for the knowledge test for the flight instructor, you might want to consider taking that. So during the lesson, we've discussed the responsibility of aviation instructors to the learner and the FAA both. We've discussed the responsibilities of the flight instructor to teach new learner pilots as well as rated pilots, and our role as advocates to aviation safety. We've also discussed how we can project a professional image and further our development of our knowledge through continuing education. Here's some of the resources and reference I'm using when we're conducting these. Bob Wander, Russell Holtz, Tom Knopf, Scott Manley, Dave Seymour. He's the one that runs the glider pilots ground school. Like I said, the next 3 evening class will be February 11th and 12th and 13th on Zoom. That'll be in 2 weeks. Our future classes will be next February 5th, Chapter 9, the Techniques of Flight Instruction. And then I'll skip that week for the glider pilots ground school, and I'll be out of town actually. And February 19th, there'll be Chapter 10, Teaching Practical Risk Management During Flight Instruction. This is a chapter that's often overlooked in the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, and I think that it's really an important chapter. We can discuss some of the scenarios that they present there as to how to integrate risk management into everyday teaching as you go along. So there's some of the references: Glider Flying Handbook, the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. Glider Flying Handbook, for most of you know, is newly published in December. So you should look at that, download that at least off the internet. Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, like Rich just suggested, that's also another important handbook to refer your students to as well. So I'm going to discuss briefly stall spin base to final. So this is right off the Soaring Safety Foundation website. I'll give you a few minutes. Yes.
Before you do, there was a question about the glider pilot ground school.
Okay.
Do you have a specific link to that? Is that the...
Yeah, I do. There it is, gliderpilotsgroundschool.com. All one word, gliderpilots with an S, groundschool.com. If you go to that, you can see that the next class will be February 11, 12, 13. If you get signed up for it, he'll send you some materials in the mail ahead of time, and which will facilitate your learning. And I believe the course is $100, but I'm not positive about that. I think it's $100. I think it's very worthwhile. It does prepare people for the knowledge test. And so I think that that's a worthwhile thing to consider and now's the best time to take that knowledge test. I mean, if you want to try to get your flight instructor certificate, coming up next season, then that's a good time to take it. As far as those of you who may have an airplane instructor certificate and will be adding a glider instructor certificate, you only have to take the knowledge test, a shortened version of the knowledge test, to add that rating. It's I think it's instead of 50 questions, it's a 25 question test. So be sure you take the correct test too. I'll try to have I will have a reference next time. I'm writing that down to remind myself. I'll have that reference for you next week so that you know which knowledge test to take, because if you take the wrong one, it won't be applicable either way. If you take the short one and you need to take the full one, it's not, they're not, even if you take the long one, it's not applicable toward the additional rating. So make sure that you take the correct knowledge test. And then if you're not a flight instructor or a ground instructor, actually you could get a ground instructor, advanced ground instructor rating, and that'll keep you, then you will not have to take the FOI test. So if you're a teacher, a college teacher or something, even a high school teacher, if you can show evidence that you're a teacher, then that negates the need to take the FOI test as well. So, but you have to have certain credentials to show that.
Thanks, Ron.
So we're good. Yeah, you bet. And if any other questions come up, we'll just, we can talk about them. We're going to show a Condor safety video showing a glider pilot trying to turn the glider using a rudder, causing the glider to stall and spin out of a skidding turn. I'll let you read the rest of that. This is how the Soaring Safety Foundation, these are videos that were put together by Scott Manley and involve Condor, and he did an excellent job in showing these, making illustrations and demonstrations of these. And we got together and came up with a narrative as well, like this, like you've just read, to introduce the video, and then to critique the video afterwards. So now I'm going to try to get out of here and go find the video. So give me a second. Well, I'll call it up again. Yeah, there we go. So this is what it'll look like on the stall spin base to final. That was the narrative you just saw. And let's see if this works. I think it'll work, hopefully. Is this showing up okay, Rich?
Yes.
Okay. And like I said, Scott Manley did these. He did an excellent job in putting this on the website for us. Now, if you watch the video, you'll see the yaw string when they're in the turn. And you'll see that the pilot is skidding the turn. But that's something that you should point out to your student when you're demonstrating this video. As soon as they start to skid the turn, there it goes. So then it talks about, you know, what happened, gives you another viewpoint here, external viewpoint of the glider. And if you'll notice that this time you can see the rudder kick over just at the wrong moment, which induces the kind of overturned final. So they're trying to rudder it around, see the rudder off to the side, ruddering around the turn. And that was an external view. This is a view from the ground as to what your friends might see as you make that turn to final. That's something that they would want to see. So then we ask a few questions, and I'm going to show you what the questions look like here in a second. I just want to credits Soaring Safety Foundation, Condor Simulator, and Scott Manley, the CFI-G. Thank you, Scott. So I'll get back to where I was at now. So this is what the instructor guide then is also on that same page that you just saw. It's just below where the video is showing. And this page provides instructors guidance on using a stall spin base to final video in their training environment. The video clip contains a condor simulation of a potential accident. The accident occurs when the accident pilot attempts to skid the glider around the turn base to final. Excessive rudder is used with opposite aileron and back pressure to keep the nose on the landing spot as the sink rate increases. You, the instructor, should emphasize the improper use of the flight controls during this event. So here, and it goes on to say, here's some of you should just also discuss the following points. And what's the student's general impression? Did the accident pilot add back pressure to the stick? And was that action appropriate? You know, adding back pressure might be that they feel like they're close to the ground and, you know, the ground is kind of rushing up at them. And so they're adding back pressure to the stick, which is increasing the angle of attack. Did the accident pilot add forward pressure to the stick? And was that action appropriate? And it didn't appear to me that he ever did apply forward pressure to the stick. So, did the accident pilot add left or right rudder? In this case, obviously, he added left rudder, trying to skid the turn. You could see that from the external view dramatically. The accident pilot changed the aileron position, and they may or may not have. It's tough to note for sure, but obviously if a wing if the glider starts to bank more severely into the turn, and so that wing increases in bank, the natural reaction is to try to limit that bank angle increase by using opposite aileron, which further exacerbates the problem, because by using opposite aileron, you're creating an even higher angle of attack on that inside wing and causing the stall to become more severe. And so, as you probably can remember, that one of the items on the spin recovery is to have the ailerons in neutral. And that's so that you don't um, enhance the ability of that inside wing to stall more dramatically. So, what is the basic problem the pilot is attempting to deal with? What actions should the glider pilot take during this phase of flight? What actions should the glider pilot avoid? So it offers you some thought-provoking questions that you can ask your students, and get them to, you know, look at this a little more critically and think about it. Like, how do you avoid that? Well, one way to avoid that is you should have started that turn to final sooner. It's actually better to start the turn to final too soon than late, because if you started too soon and you're not going to be lined up with the runway when you roll out of the turn, well, you can always relax the bank a little bit, which is a much safer way to go around that corner, and relax the bank angle a little bit, shallow it out a little bit, and let the glider drift, back over toward the runway. Versus if you start that turn too late, you tend to steepen the bank. You could tend to rudder the turn around the corner like that, which would lead to that kind of an accident. So the reason I'm doing this is because I think that it's important that you see what the Soaring Safety Foundation has to offer on our website. I mean, I think we have some really valuable tools there for the flight instructors to be able to utilize. Last week we showed you the slip to landing maneuver that Bert had, which was in a real live fighter. But we also have these videos, which show condor scenarios as well. So, as I just talked to my friend Don Crush earlier this week, and he's in charge of distributing the Condor simulators to the various clubs around the country who asked for them. I think he's still got a few more, although he's getting close to not having the full set of structures to the stick and the structure for the simulator itself and the seat and things like that. He's basically running out of those. So if you think you or your club, specifically if your club wants to get involved with something like that, you should contact Don or the SSA. If you contact myself or Denise in the SSA, they'll point you toward Don, and he can get you set up with something like that. Right now, the SSA is sponsoring that with 50%. So you or your club specifically, if your club puts in 50% of the cost, the SSA will put in the other 50% of the cost, and so it's a great deal if you're ever thinking about trying to get a simulator going for your club. We bought one for our club, and it's really been a good training tool, especially in the winter months. As we move forward and we're not able to fly, generally we're not able to fly up where we're at in the winter months. So use of simulation is really good. But even in the areas that, where you are able to fly on a regular basis, those days when it's too windy or those days when it's raining out or low ceilings or something like that, having a simulator is a valuable tool that you can utilize. And there's I personally am sold on it. I mean, I think and Scott Manley's been pushing these for probably at least 10 years, and he's been sold on it for a long time. and has trained any number of pilots over the winter months, particularly trying to get them prepared for the upcoming season. And he's been pretty successful at it, to be quite honest. And people feel much more prepared, much better prepared for the season when it arrives, and in general tend to do a lot better job at flying the glider when they're actually flying a glider. So I'd promote that you consider your club to look into that. So, do we have any more questions or comments from our panel?
Yeah, can you hear me, Ron? Over?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah, in the Minnesota Soaring Club, we've adopted the simulator method of training. And on weekends in particular, when people are signed up to receive ground and flight instruction from Minnesota Soaring Club flight instructors, if it rains, everybody shows up except for the tow pilot, because we simply default to the simulator. It's been great. Routinely in Minnesota, we would miss in a 6 or 7 month season many weekend days to weather where flight training was not possible, but the simulator wipes that away. So like you and like Scott Manley, I'm a big fan of the flight simulation. Over.
Yeah, thanks. That's Bob Wander making that comment. Thanks, Bob, for that comment. Anybody else from the panel or any other questions that have come up?
Well, there was a question, should this be an ad hoc or a specific dedicated sim session? And I think the answer is it should be integrated program that incorporates both flight training in the aircraft and in the simulator.
Yeah, and it can be. Scott's got a curriculum that you could, I think, obtain from him. I'm not sure exactly what that situation is, but I know that he's got a curriculum that can be followed for simulator training. I know that Russell Holtz has a simulator curriculum that you can follow as well. And I'm sure there's others out there. I'm not trying to promote one or the other. I'm just trying to provide some information so that you can pick and choose on your own. So, but yeah, I don't see a reason why you shouldn't be able to use a curriculum. And if you're wanting to teach turns this weekend, get on that simulator and teach turns in the simulator. But as I know that we've pointed out several times, and Rich pointed it out earlier, especially in the simulator, you really got to watch people to make sure they look before they make their turns, because in the simulator you get lazy and you don't look because there's nothing out there to run into. But it's a habit that you want to form, and so there are some bad habits that the simulator can develop. But if an instructor is taking good observation of that, he or she can mitigate some of those bad habits by insisting that the learner continue to use the good habits that they've developed and want to continue to develop, whether they're sitting in a simulator or sitting in a glider. So,
Ron,
Go ahead, Ken.
This is Ken. I got an email recently that I'll read, and then I can forward it if we need to. It says, greetings from the SSA Simulator Committee. In order to support the use of simulators in glider flight training, the SSA has expanded its simulator matching funds program to include training materials. The SSA has partnered with gliderbooks.com to offer 50% off the retail price of all training materials related to simulators. So there's a 50% discount available if you want the Holtz stuff. And Holtz has simulator lessons for Condor.
yeah, that's true, and I forgot to mention that. Thanks.
So we have a couple
Ron,
of questions here, Ron. Go ahead.
Go
just
ahead.
briefly, one advantage of the simulator that we do at the Minnesota Soaring Club is that we have 3 or 4 candidates at a time, and they each take a turn in the simulator for 45 minutes or so. And the other 3 candidates watch from behind. You can't do that in a Schweitzer 233. but you can do it with a simulator. And it's really fun to watch the candidates who are not actually in the simulator pick up on the mistakes that the candidate flying, the guy who's in the barrel, makes. So this is something that simulation provides that we can't possibly recreate in the air. Over.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Bob. And you know as well as I do that as instructors, we see that those kinds of things as well. Sitting in the back seat, we see things that we know the students isn't observing, and similarly, when you have other observers back there, and I can't be kibitzing, but when you have other observers back there, that's I think a good way to enhance their learning so that they can see what maybe they're doing wrong as well, and that they haven't noticed when they're actually dealing with the flight itself.
So,
And Rich, you had some other questions?
yeah, there's a couple here. There's some comments about which test you must take using the testing matrix, and I think the point that we should drive home is that there's questions about which test you need to take. Look at the testing matrix, and if you have questions, contact your FSDO. Because
Yeah,
they're
I'm
the
not sure
ones who set the rules.
Yeah, I'm not sure the FSDO would be real helpful. I'm gonna disappear here for 2 seconds and get the testing matrix out, and that way I can tell you exactly what you need to take. So
Okay.
hang on a second.
Regarding this question of using GPS data to replay flights for instructional purposes, anyone have a comment on that? It's certainly a good tool to do when you're doing cross-country training. For basic training, it's certainly a good tool to allow the individual to see what they've done and reduce or remove any ambiguity. The instructor says you were not flying downwind perpendicular to the runway or parallel to the runway, and the student claims, yes, I was. The GPS trace can certainly show you what you were doing and how you were compensating for any crosswinds that might have been existing. So there is a good reason to do that. There's a comment here from Rick.
Okay, I'm back with you. The testing matrix, I'm not sure this is the absolute latest one, but they come out with one about every year or 18 months. But it looks something like this. Can you see that, Rich?
Yeah, I know what it looks like, Ron. I can't read your version there.
Yeah, okay. So I'm trying to see. I think if you go on the FAA website, FAA.gov website, and you type in their Airman Knowledge Testing Matrix, it'll come up with the entire. It's about a 10 or 15 page document, and I'm looking now for the tests that you have to take. Flight instructor. So flight instructor glider for an added rating is AFG. That's the test code. So if you go to the testing center and ask for the AFG test, the flight instructor glider added rating test, the 25 question test, and you're allotted 1 hour to take the test. If you want to go and get a advanced ground instructor or basic ground instructor, the advanced ground instructor is a 100 question test, and it's primarily on the FOI, to be quite honest. The flight instructor glider test, so is FIG. So AFG is for the added rating flight instructor glider, and FIG, flight instructor glider, is the 100 question test that you have to take for the initial glider flight instructor test. And then if you don't have a instructor rating or you're not a teacher, you have to take the fundamentals of instructing test, which is based on the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, and that's the FOI test. So
if
I'll
you-
try, I'll try to have that, a
Yeah.
picture of that on next week's slide presentation.
So if you show up for an applicant shows up for a practical test and they have taken the 100-question glider flight instructor exam when they're adding on to an airplane instructor rating, what would you do?
I'd say you're not eligible. And you have to go take the added rating test, the AFG test. And I believe I'm correct. I,
I believe you are too, but
yeah, they change the rules now and then, and I can read down through here again just to make sure I'm correct. But I believe that if you show up having taken the wrong test, the incorrect test, that I'm not allowed to give you an exam based on the
Just
wrong
say it. Just
knowledge
say it
test.
around the. Just say it around the candidate is toast over.
Well, they won't be very happy, and I probably won't be very happy either because it's a bummer if you think you're all ready and you're not. So yeah, it's important that you as a flight instructor, know what you're doing, and this testing matrix is readily available to you, and so you need to go look at that so that you're um, and it says right in here also authorization for flight and ground instructor tests listed above, which are that's for added rating. So no, like that. You have to
okay.
have a recommendation to take these initial tests. So, yep.
All right. There's a comment in here about the spot landing task in the PTS. And are we actually teaching people the skills they need, which is if you're landing in an off-field site, you don't want to roll along the ground for a long distance to get within 200 feet of the fence. You want to stop as quickly as possible. So the question really is, are we teaching people to do the right thing? Or are we giving them bad instruction?
Well, when I give the exam, if you read the PTS, it says that the applicant must land in the designated area, and so I don't give them a designated area of the entire runway. I usually give them a designated area of about 1,000 feet with a definite starting point and a definite stopping point. And so, I try to be reasonable so that they don't have to use excessive braking. We're not trying to, but I think that 1,000 feet is a reasonable thing to utilize in most sailplanes these days, modern sailplanes with good dive brakes and good wheel braking and things like that. And so I think that the person who wrote the question is correct. It's poor technique to be utilizing the entire runway, and in fact, interestingly enough, I usually just utilize less than half the runway, to be quite honest. And most runways, if you got a 3,000-foot runway, you're going to land in 1,500 feet or 1,000 feet even. And we set out cones ahead of time, or sometimes we set out the golf cart, but that doesn't work so pretty good sometimes, does it, Rich?
No. It can be fun though.
Yeah, Rich. I think we were using the golf cart. I think we were using a car for Rich's test,
Yeah.
and he remarked that as he was on final, that somebody got in the car and moved it. So that wasn't a very good marker for the ending. It was actually for the ending point. So we had to. That's one of those situations where we have to continue to test in an area because we can't complete it, not due to the applicants not being able to do it. So, but
Yeah, I figured I was toast no matter what I did.
So at any rate, we have to do that one again.
Yeah.
But it's so try to come up with some realistic. And I agree with the instructor or the applicant who made mention of that. I mean, I agree with you that it should be a reasonable distance. And if you read the PTS, that's what it says. It doesn't say you got the whole runway. It says it should an area land in the area as described by the examiner. And so I usually use about 1,000 or 1,200 feet, to be quite honest, which is 1,200 feet is about a quarter mile. So, almost in any area of the country, you should be able to find a field that's at least a quarter mile long. Good question.
Yeah, there's a question about, do we think that 1 hour of simulator training is equal to 1 hour of flight training?
Well, first of all, realize that the simulator training, while it can be logged, it can't be used to qualify a person for a practical test. And so just remember that. I'm not saying that it's it should be kept track of. You should keep track of it. And so the question is it as valuable? Well, in some cases it might be more valuable because you have the ability to put the glider in the air and just fly the pattern over and over and over again, or something like that. So I mean, in some cases it might be more valuable. I actually, I have a little bit of a problem personally with just flying the pattern over and over again because it doesn't allow the learner to develop the judgment necessary of when to get back to the general vicinity of the airport and when to enter the pattern and for the approach and landing and how to enter the pattern. If you enter from downwind, and this is something you can do with the simulator, you can purposely put the learner downwind of the airport and see what they do. Do they try to go all the way across the airport to the usual IP, or do they recognize that they're going to be too low by the time they get over there and utilize the Soaring Safety Foundation's methodology of trying to land, trying to fly a pattern around the point that you're attempting to land at. And so it gives you some flexibility from that aspect. I mean, I've been flying last few weeks. We've got a little racing going on amongst some of our glider club members, and it's amazing how, especially this version 3 that Condor currently has out, it does a pretty good job at simulating lift in the air and stuff, things like that, and figure out how to work the lift and things like that. So we've been racing the last few weeks, cross country flying, upwards of 100 to 150 miles, and so it's an interesting. You get to think about how you want to fly in between thermals. You get to think about where maybe you want to fly. Again, the lift is pretty consistent. We lined up with the landmarks on the ground that you would expect, and the cues, the visual cues in the air, the clouds in the air. So it's not a very. In fact, I'd have to say that's a pretty good simulation of it, and you can build your confidence in flying cross country that way. I mean, it's actually. I'm pleasantly surprised. Let's just put it that way, that the simulator, especially the version 3 of Condor, is working as well as it is, and offers some friendly little competitions amongst your other glider pilots, and there's no risk of crashing when you land. I mean, obviously you want to. There again, you should totally try to practice all the way to the ground and make sure that you pick a nice field to land in and not crash into the trees short of the runway or something like that. I mean, you should think of it as if you really are in a glider in the air and trying to perform. And if you get low, you need to be looking for a field to land in and pick a nice field and land in it. So I mean, it's a good simulation all around, and I would encourage you to utilize it as that and not as a toy. I mean, try not to think of it as a game per se. but that would allow you to crash. I mean, I don't think I don't think that's the purpose of it, to be quite honest. I think it should be utilized as a learning tool and a teaching tool.
Ron, Bob Wander, I have a question. We have well over 100 participants tonight, and I'm wondering if it's possible that we could query them to see if their local glider club or commercial glider school, in fact, uses flight simulation. I'd like to know very much how much penetration into the clubs around the country in particular that the simulation movement has penetrated over.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bob. So why don't you, type in if your club uses simulation or not, and identify yourself where you're at if you feel like you can. I mean, we're not trying to pry into your private life or even your club's private life, but it would be a good indication of how much simulation we're actually using out there, because I think as we move forward, we might find that it's a valuable way to actually a valuable way to grow soaring. I mean, we're trying to utilize it as a soaring growth tool as well, because it offers people to keep motivated during the winter months up north here, and during the bad weather days out at the local glider field, and keeps them coming to the glider field, and that camaraderie of people that you have at the glider field when you get there, and you can all hop in the simulator for a short half hour, 45 minute, an hour flight, whatever, and just have fun with it, because I think that it can offer a real a channel that is not been utilized in the past, but I think it's something that we need to consider seriously in the future, and continue to work in that endeavor. I know that the overwhelming response at Oshkosh each year, Don and Scott Manley have manned the simulator booth up there in the glider in the SSA booth at Oshkosh, and basically they have a continuous line of people lining up to fly the simulators all day. I mean, Don barely has time to go to lunch, and usually he doesn't really go to lunch very often. I mean, he says it's just been amazing, the amount of interest and the just continually, and they don't let him play with it. I mean, it's not a toy. He usually doesn't force him to fly the tow, but so he can, start him at 2,000 feet and let him fly around and maybe try to work some lift and talk to him a little bit, try to talk to him through the landing and stuff. So you're utilizing it as a learning tool, and so I think it's very valuable that way. So if you
coming in,
good.
there was one comment I wanted Bob to make. Do you think we need, or you need to have incentives to get your students to use the simulator, Bob?
Is that a question for Wander? Over.
Yes.
Yeah, well, one of the incentives is it costs about 1% as much to fly lessons in the simulator as it does to use a tow plane and a glider. Number two, you can stop the simulation at any time, seize it up, and show the candidate, look, this is what you did, and this is where you're at. Is this really what you want? I could go on, but if nothing else, the financial efficiency of the simulator should make people embrace it with a great deal of affection. Over.
Yeah, and the simulator that Don has developed, is a 3-screen simulator, so you have peripheral vision besides just the straight ahead. It's not that you can't use just a straight ahead one monitor system, but I think that the 3-screen simulator, the 3 video, actually they're TVs. He's using they're not monitors, they're TVs, and they plug in, using a HDMI cable. So you have to have a card that's able to run 3 screens in your computer, And so the computer is a little bit more costly, but it's not too bad. I think Don, I was talking to Don the other day about that, and I think he said for about $1,200 you can get a computer that'll run the three screens. And so and I think, and some clubs I know use Oculus and head tracking, uh, you know, devices where you just have one screen, and when you look like this, the screen actually moves in that direction. And so um, some of our um, pilots at our club have a little trouble with nausea with the head tracker or the Oculus. So you have to be, it's not for everybody. But those people who tolerate it and in fact enjoy it or like it, I think that it's pretty nice. Especially I know when you look up with the Oculus, you can see the clouds just like you can see the clouds in real life. And so I mean, if you don't get too queasy about that, there's the motion like that. The Oculus actually works pretty nicely, but like I said, it's not for everybody. Versus the three screen method really works well as well. So,
Ron,
and you can look up with that with the stick. The stick has has a top hat on it that you can move the fore and aft and move the screen up and down. So it's not that you can't look up. So
So we've had a lot of, sorry,
Ron,
Ron, we've had a lot of responses to the Bob's question. Now Frank has created a survey. So please look at the survey on your screen and respond to that so we can get things summarized in a very nice manner. Right,
thanks,
Frank?
Frank. Thanks, Frank.
not on the fly, so it's not a perfect poll, but there's 5 questions there about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also,
Thank.
one thing I'd like to mention, we went out and did some winch training at various chapters, and an instructor, if they're practiced with Condor, can use it as a whiteboard tool. In other words, that external view allows you to show external views. You can put the ribbons on the wings to show the airspeed over the wings. You get a red ribbon or a green ribbon for the faster or slower wind speed to demonstrate what happens in a spin or when you create a spin situation. And so that external view allows you to use it as an effective whiteboard in case you don't have a simulator. Everything doesn't have to be a stick and rudder sort of exercise. So it's a pretty powerful training tool.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I've grown up in simulators with the airlines, and I agree. It's not the same as the airline, but it's pretty darn good. It's pretty darn good, especially the third version of Condor is really much better, um, much better simulation, much better. Well, if there's no more questions or more comments from our panel, I guess I think we'll call it a night. Now, I'm planning to be here 1 week from tonight. We'll get another Zoom message out to everyone. And if you want credit, uh, my friend and fellow person in the Soaring Safety Foundation, Glenn Collins, is going to see that the people get issued credits. So the email address that you signed up with has to be the same email address. Now, you have to either give Glenn a different email address if that's the email address you're signed up with at the FAAsafety.gov, because that's how he's going to find you to give you the credit. He's going to go to the FAAsafety.gov, look for your email address in there, and then give you the credit for this class. So it's important that you sign up with that. And Frank has a list of the emails of those of you who signed up for this class, and we'll turn that over to Glenn, and he'll make a good attempt at getting all those credits in there for you for this class. So thanks for it. Go ahead.
Ron, one more comment. The invite email went out early in the meeting for the next session. So far, it's been opened by 2,000 people. It's also, the registration link is posted on the SSA Facebook page, and it's also was sent to the chapters list. So
Okay.
it's already out there. I'm sure we.
And Ken, I think you'll make sure that it goes out too, right?
What's that?
Yes. Yep. I
And
can
the
send it out in the Google group.
Yeah, the Google group, instructor Google groups.
It's
Yep.
already done.
What's that?
I think it's already done.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll make sure it's out there. So, the more we can promote this, the more acceptance it gets, and the more people we train. I think it's just going to, we're trying to get this thing going so that we can sustain and get good instructors to teach people how to fly gliders. And I think that's one key element that we need to continue to grow, or to try to grow this sport back to where it once was, is to have a good core of quality instructors. And that's the whole purpose of running these courses. So like I showed earlier in the program, the next week is Chapter 9, Techniques of Flight Instruction. So try to go through and read that to give yourself a little bit of a heads up and a little bit of a head start on what's going to go on. But otherwise, it'll be the same time next week, Wednesday, February 5th, and Chapter 9, Techniques of Flight Instruction. Thanks again for anything else from the panel, or Frank?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay. Well, thanks for your participation. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week. Take care.